So hold on to that Alleluia. Today we bury the Alleluia. We don't sing it again now and for 7 weeks until Easter Sunday morning. We got back a Friday night from our visit to Israel, and last Monday we changed our Mass place to this church. It's called Dominus Flevit. In Latin means the Lord wept. It's a church on the Mount of Olives overlooking the Kidron Valley. From inside the church, there's a window that looks out across the valley to the other side. And you can see in the window there, see that gold Dome of the Rock, which is near where the temple stood on Mount Zion, across on the Temple Mount. I never had Mass in this church. In 2012, when we were there, our last day was Ash Wednesday. We actually had a little service with ashes in this church. So I still ended up not having Mass in this church because when we got there, somebody else was already booked for our time. So we ended up in a little altar and a seating area off to the side, outside, which actually was a very beautiful spot for the Mass because we could look out across the valley and kind of recall the whole events of the Paschal Mystery. This image of Jesus weeping over Jerusalem happens on Palm Sunday when he comes into the city. But then he realizes that he's likely to be put to death. And from the Mount of Olives, he looks out across the city. And in Luke's Gospel, chapter 13, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a mother hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. From our vantage point, you can see the cenacle, the upper room where Jesus handed over his life in the Eucharist and then made his way down from the city into the Kidron Valley and across to the Mount of Olives to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. As he came down the mountain and into the valley, he would have had to walk through a graveyard just outside the walls of the city. There would have been graves back in the time of Jesus. And it's quite likely on that night, as he walked past the graves, that he realized he was facing his own death. And so in the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed and then placed his life in the Father's hands, saying, "Not my will, but your will be done." And it was here in the Garden of Gethsemane that Judas handed over Jesus in betrayal. And he was led back across the valley to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. There's a church there, the Church of St. Peter. It's located at the house of the high priest because it was in the courtyard outside the high priest's house that Peter handed Jesus over in denial. The rooster on the roof of this church recalls the moment when Peter woke up to realize what he had done, and the Lord turned and looked at him. Finally, Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate near the temple and was handed over to be crucified. From our outdoor chapel, we could see the movement down into the valley and back again. The Paschal Mystery is the path of descent, dying in order to rise again. And at Mass that day, we read the first reading we read today from Isaiah chapter 49. Looking straight across to the Temple Mount, we could imagine that moment in 598 BCE when the temple was destroyed and left in ruins. The people were taken away to Babylon, and they were separated from the very place where they had encountered God in the temple. And so it seemed to them as if God had forsaken them. And they cried out in this poignant prayer of lament, "The Lord has forsaken me, my Lord has forgotten me." But then God answered, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. See, I have inscribed you on the palm of my hands. God has engraved our names on his hands. As painful as the Babylonian captivity was for the Jews, this was actually a time of great spiritual renewal. It was during their exile in Babylon that they actually came to believe in the one God. Up to that time, they had many gods, but from that moment on, for the first time, they strove after the one true God. As long as they were doing well, they were striving for many things. They didn't need to rely on God. But when their hands were empty and all that they had built with their hands lay in ruins, they discovered that God had not abandoned them, that they were held in the hands of God. Jesus began his Sermon on the Mount by reminding us that the path up is really the path down, the path of descent. Blessed are the poor in spirit. There seems to be nothing blessed about being empty and poor. But Jesus reminds us that we cannot serve two masters. Either we are the masters of our own destiny, or God is. If our hands are full, there's no room for God. Only in handing ourselves over do we make room for God in our lives. Consider the lilies of the field, Jesus tells us, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon, in all his glory, was not clothed like one of these. So Jesus is inviting us to set our hearts on the things that are above, not on things that are of earth. He's teaching us how to see. You have to see something to desire it. And so we are instructed to seek first on the things that matter, ultimately. In the end, what matters is not what is in our hands, but that we are held in the palm of God's hand. So, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today.